Welcome to the Mama Making Podcast, a space for moms figuring it out in real time. This show is here to help you feel a little less alone in the mess and magic of motherhood. If that sounds like your kind of vibe, make sure to follow the show, share it with a friend, and keep showing up, exactly as you are. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Mama Making Podcast. I'm your host, Jessica. If you're new, welcome. If you're not new, then welcome back. Today, I am thrilled to have Cheri Bergeron on the podcast. Cheri is an author, blogger, public speaker, trained life coach, and founder of the nonprofit Cheri's Choice, where she guides women through alternative paths to motherhood. Her memoir, Mission Motherhood, chronicles her experience with relationships, workplace pressures, infertility, IVF, donor conception, all the above after 40, including the realities of quote-unquote geriatric pregnancy. Thank you, Cheri, for being on. I'm so excited to chat with you.
Me too. It's great to meet you.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit more about you, who you are, where you're from, whatever you're comfortable sharing.
Well, I started out like so many women, focused on my career. And I grew up in a very traditional household, but I had gone through, I was kind of a child of the 70s. So I was a big, I am woman, hear me roar, into my career. And so I launched into that. I was in the Bay Area in the Silicon Valley, the perfect place to start a high-tech career. And I enjoyed a tremendous amount of financial freedom and self-determination. And yet in the back of my head, there was always this, I will just ultimately meet someone and then children will come naturally. And that'll just kind of all magically happen, as it did for my parents in a previous generation. But it didn't work out that way for me. And so I ended up in these relationships that would always kind of fall apart around a key question. Can I have children with this person? Do I see myself having children with them? And so that just kept kicking the baby question down the road further and further. So ultimately, I did decide to get married to someone because of the urgency of my biological clock. Probably not the best choice I've ever made. It was really because I thought I needed to be married in order to qualify for motherhood. And so I thought, well, okay, I'm married. Now the babies are just going to come. Crickets. They didn't come. 37, 38, 39. And at 40, I sought the help of a fertility doctor. And that really started a lot of my journey with IVF. And, that's where a lot of the drama ensued. So,
Yeah, I would love to just pick up right there and see kind of how the process started for you and go through your story, maybe in chronological order, maybe we jump around, but I'd love to kind of see how everything connected together.
well, first, I really wasn't very informed about reproductive timelines or my fertility. I had seen articles about celebrities having children in their 40s, even in their 50s. And so I carried this thought with me that said, hey, you have time. You have all the time in the world to kind of let these things unfold. You might need some medical help, but that's okay. And when I sat there in that fertility clinic, I learned that there are some biological realities that I didn't really understand. And it was kind of blindsiding to me. I was like, how did I miss the memo? I'm an empowered woman. I am capable. I'm a planner. Like, how did I miss this? And so then IVF for many is a big struggle. 1 out of 6 people struggle with infertility. And so it's one of these things where it's very isolating. You measure your life in 30-day increments and you're full of hope about what's going to happen this next cycle. And then a few weeks later, things aren't going the way they should. And you're back at square one. And, there's often loss in that process. I experienced some, like many women do. And it's hard to know who to talk to about those kinds of things. Sometimes that topic is so personal and it's so heavy when you think about losing children and things that women become, one, very angry at themselves. Why did I make the decisions I made? Angry at their bodies. Why are you failing me? And then who can I really talk to about this, in this sort of quiet pain that happens. So, that was really a lot of my journey.
Yeah, and I think if I've heard anything from IVF, people who have done it and successfully had children or those who decided to stop, the one thing that resonates for me always is the isolation factor. It's so isolating because even with people who are going through it, no two people are going through the same IVF journey, so I can definitely understand that portion of it.
Yeah, and the emotions though are very similar. This desperation, this depression, the shame and blame of our bodies and things like that. Those are all very similar feelings that we end up having. But then what happened to me is my doctor suggested that I use an egg donor. And that was a new thing to me. I didn't realize that there were such things. I knew about sperm donors, but I didn't know about egg donors. And I learned that if I use the eggs of a younger woman, let's say a 25-year-old woman, my odds of having a healthy child were the same as hers, right about, even if I'm in my 40s. And that was kind of a new opening for me that actually I could experience the most parts of motherhood and have a healthy child. And so that was a real revelation. And yes, that child wouldn't share my genetics, but comparing the odds of having a child with health issues due to the quality of my eggs versus having a healthy child that didn't share my genetics, there was no, there was no choice there for me. I would always choose, my child's benefit. So, that was a big new pathway, because a lot of times I think we have this mindset that there's only one way to become a mother. And what I learned is there's many paths to become a mother, and you are really on a journey of figuring out what is the right path for you. And that's really why I started Cheri's Choice, to provide education for women so that they could understand much earlier what all those paths are.
Yeah, and I think what's challenging for us as women is that we have this idea, this like fairy tale idea that I'll get married and have kids and this is exactly how it goes. And when it doesn't, we don't really know where to turn for. I mean, now we're in an age where there is an abundance of information, but even still, I know a lot of women feel just as lost trying to figure out what's next for them and how the processes all operate and what their options are. So, I would love to hear more about the work that you're doing and how that kind of helps steward women in that beginning process.
Right. Well, I think actually there's so much information that it's probably overwhelming. That's one of the issues now. And the other thing is, I think if we're still stuck in these old mindsets, we don't seek out the information because we're still hoping that we will get the fairy tale. And so one of the things that I say is, if the glass slipper doesn't fit, then screw the fairy tale, and the notion is that there are many different flavors of fairy tales, that ultimately, just like dresses, fairy tales aren't one size fits all. And so the way to start that journey is through personal evaluation. I think, what are the things that are most important to you? And what are you willing to trade, what trade-offs are you willing to make? What are your non-negotiables? Things like that. I mean, for example, Jennifer Aniston just came out and said, look, if I wasn't going to have my own biological children, then that's it for me. I'm not interested in adoption. I'm not interested in fostering. And you know what? That is totally her right to choose. In my case, having an egg donor opened up a whole new window for me to be a mother. And that was a blessing for me. And so, every woman, it's like a fingerprint. Every woman has such a unique journey. So really, Cheri's Choice is about helping women walk through this process of thinking about their priorities, thinking about their non-negotiables, and then seeing all the paths that they could take to become a mother.
Yeah. So, for those who don't know, what are the very many options that people have to become a mom?
Oh, goodness. So, I mean, one of my first recommendations is to get a fertility assessment so that you just have a baseline to know where you are if you really feel strongly that you want to become a mother. And you can get a fertility assessment at low cost, relatively speaking, for medical procedures. And you can do it long before you're planning on having children. I think that's really significant. And what it's going to do is look at your hormone levels, and it's also going to look at your anatomy so that you know, and what are the odds of having a natural pregnancy, and is my body conducive to conceiving and carrying and delivering a child. So that's really key information for someone at any age. So then you really look at, if that's all good, then a recommendation really is around freezing your eggs. If you want to preserve your options for biological children, that's something that if you harvest your eggs and put them to the side on ice, if you will, then you can draw upon them later when you find the right partner or when you feel that your timing is right. So I think that kind of process gives women a lot of power to choose their timing. If that doesn't work for whatever reason, there's surrogacy. There's IVF if and there's donors, as we talked about, egg donors and sperm donors. And then if those paths aren't right for you, there's also foster parenting, there's adoption, there's all of these other processes to find the right child. I actually was a foster parent for a time, and there are foster to adopt programs. It didn't work in my case, but I know many people that have gotten their beautiful families that way. So again, it's really just this journey of discovery of what is the right path for each woman.
Yeah, I love that. So, going back to your own story, how did you determine what was going to be the right next step for you?
Well, some of it was dictated to me by biology, but the other piece was, as I said, I had gotten married, kind of trying to force fit the fairy tale, and found that we were really not compatible. And one of the ways that that shows itself is when things get stressful or things get difficult. And so we encountered some loss and some disappointment along the way. And in that process, I found out that we really were not on the same page in terms of seeing parenthood in the same way. And so I was faced with a decision at that point. Do I go forward and, stay with this person who I know that I have fundamental incompatibilities, or do I do this as a single mother by choice? And for me, the right decision was to become a single mother by choice. And that decision was just choosing motherhood over a relationship that wasn't working. But I will tell you that down the road, I ended up finding someone for me, and we are now a big blended family. So a lot of people think that if you choose single motherhood, that means you're going to be single forever. You're going to do this by yourself forever. That's not true. What it means is you now have the ability to be very selective of the partner who's right for you without the pressure of motherhood or your biological clock kind of driving your decisions. So you have much greater sort of power of choice in that situation.
Yeah, I would love to get more into the solo parenting by choice. What were some of the factors that you had to consider when you were like, okay, I'm going to do this on my own? I'm sure there's a financial component, obviously an emotional, physical component as well. What were some of the things that went into making that decision for you?
Well, I do think that a responsible parent thinks about, are they ready to take something like that on? Do they have a stable home environment? Do they have the right financial resources? And I think we do need to think that children don't need all the things that our society kind of says that are required. You don't need to have $1,000 birthday parties and things like that. So, I mean, get really clear about just what kind of finances give them the real things they need, which are time, love, and commitment from you. Those are the things kids need. But, and then, who is your support system? I think even traditional families need great support systems. And so single parents are no different than that. So I think those are the kinds of things that you need to think through just from the stability perspective. And then there's really some emotional work that you need to do, which is in grieving, very legitimately grieving the fairy tale that you had always hoped would happen. And realizing that even though it doesn't look the way you imagined, it can still be beautiful. And so I really feel that that's a journey where you let love kind of lead you and you say, I believe that I'm worthy of giving this love to a child. And then I'm worthy of finding a person who's actually worthy of me. And, that I'm going to take my time and do that. And so I think those are some of the journeys you need to go through. And then there are so many single mother by choice communities to connect with that I think sometimes you think, oh, I'm going to feel all alone. I'm going to feel like some unicorn. Well, I can tell you, you are not a unicorn. There are a lot of women who have claimed this choice for themselves. And there are many communities out there that you can engage with both before you've become a mother and after.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love the idea of kind of reframing what it looked like for you. And what other areas did you notice yourself kind of maybe instinctually or forcing yourself to create kind of a reframe on what your idea of being a solo parent would look like?
Well, I think it really goes down to what constitutes a family. My journey showed that it would be harder to try to parent with someone who we had fundamental incompatibilities instead of doing it on my own. And the other piece of it was that I had even biological family members who weren't supportive of my journey around IVF and things like that. So that really caused me to question, what is my definition of family? And so that freed me up to be able to find people who were there for me, who accepted me, who supported me and loved me unconditionally. And they didn't have to be related to me biologically. And I think that was a very freeing kind of shift that I made. That I wasn't confined to this very narrow definition. And I really think that women have the opportunity to claim that for themselves because, we think that female empowerment is just about the workplace. But what I say is that female empowerment is about planning our path to motherhood just the way we plan our careers. We have the ability to do that. And so some people say that becoming a single mother by choice is somehow failure. And for me, it was really freedom.
That's so interesting to like, my first thought is like, it's just another option. It's just another way to do it. But I imagine, as you said, there's some kind of like push and pull or conflict that shows up in areas that you didn't really expect. I imagine your nonprofit building that community is super powerful for the women who are experiencing that, whose families maybe aren't on board or their social system or structure also isn't on board or whatever it might be. I'm sure having that community group who is like, I totally get it, here's what I did or here's what I would do differently. I'm sure that has had a great impact on many women who make this choice.
It's true. And I think that women think that they are the only ones or how can I do this? Can I do this by myself? And the answer becomes no, nobody does this by themselves. But if you see examples of people who make it work, who have beautiful families doing it this way, you go, oh, okay, well, if she can do it, then I can do it. And I have listened to the other big question is, well, is it fair to the child to only have one parent? That's a very responsible question for somebody who's really deeply caring about their future child. And the thing is, I've listened to so many interviews of adult children of single parents, and you know what they say? They say, my childhood was normal. They don't see it as lack. They see that they had a loving, knitted parent that they spent quality time with, who accepted them. And that's all kids need, guys. That's really what they need. And so they never missed what they didn't have. I think it's very true that actually children of divorce might feel a greater loss with that kind of situation because they had something and now they have something different. But for single mothers by choice and their children, it just feels perfectly normal and wonderful.
I think it's so interesting. Like, so many of us are walking around the world with single parents, single moms, and don't ever think twice about it now. But to make that connection between those who had single parents by choice, you're totally right. They're not, quote unquote, missing something that didn't
Yeah,
exist before.
right.
Yeah, they're not grieving what was once had before. So that's a really interesting thing that I never really thought about.
And it really takes a moment to get introspective and get clarity. And I think that's really a big part of what Cheri's Choice is about, because if you're clear on what your values are and what your priorities are, and then you're able to look at other people who have pursued different paths, I think you suddenly become a lot more confident in taking this kind of path if it seems like it's the right one for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that leads me into learning more about your landmark legal case. I think that takes a bit of confidence to go up against the legal system. Tell me everything. I want to know how it started, what it was like in the middle, and how
Why aren't
how
we
it ended
drinking
up.
wine? Why aren't we
Yeah.
drinking wine for this conversation? This is the wine conversation.
Yeah.
Sometimes the hardest things are the things that you never see coming. So buckle up, everybody, because this one is a little weird. You have to try to follow me. So what happened was, of course, I told you that I had gotten married, and then things started to fall apart, but we had shared embryos. So I went forward and I got pregnant, ended up having my daughter. I also had a son that passed away as part of that process. And he had said that he didn't want any part of having to do with any children. That was that moment where we kind of were going separate ways, at least in our definition of parenthood. Well, so my daughter ended up surviving. She was in the NICU, but now she's wonderful. And we were legally separated even before she was born. Actually, even before I knew I was pregnant, because we'd had this division. And ultimately, he changed his mind and said he wanted to be a part of my daughter's life, which I guess happens. I'm not a person who tends to change their mind about big life decisions like this, especially when you've documented them, in documents and all that. But anyway, I then went ahead and said I wanted to have a second child. And so I used an anonymous sperm donor. And when my son was 4, 7 years after we had legally separated and were living separate lives, he sued me to become my son's legal father. So
Wow.
that's the crux of the case. And so what was at issue here, and why it's significant probably for other women, is that the key question was, does a woman who is still legally married, even if she has gone through paperwork to be legally separated, does she have the right to pursue an independent pregnancy with an anonymous sperm donor? And my in 2020, this was in 2019, was, well, hell yes, we do. But our court systems are actually not that flexible. And so a lot of our laws haven't caught up with both our medicine, but also with the family dynamics. I mean, there are reasons why some people decide to stay married. In our case, we had a business that we were managing together. And so even though we were living separate lives, there were reasons why we were still legally married. But he had a girlfriend, we were not living together, all of those things. And yet he could make this change. And my son, because I used an anonymous sperm donor, was up for grabs.
Wow.
Wow. Yeah,
Yeah.
it is. It's a wow. And people say, well, why didn't you just get a DNA test? And that is a great question because, of course, I was like, yeah, let's just go get the DNA test because he knew that he wasn't the father and he didn't play any part in the IVF process that created my son. He wasn't living with him, all these things. But there are actually laws on the books that say that if there is a relationship between this person and your child and it would be harmful to the child to remove it, then they can deny a DNA test and make him the father. And
Okay.
that's the truly crazy part.
Yeah.
And took me 6 months to have that heard in court and ultimately win that case because he was not in any meaningful way a father of my son.
Right.
So, 6 months, $250,000. And I had to surrender my son for 5 of those months for independent visits with him, simply because we were legally married.
Wow, that is really interesting. I think that's a total example, if for lack of better words, of how our legal system is very outdated when it comes to family and what things look like today.
Very true. Cheri's Choice, one of our missions is also to help get some of these laws modernized because the reality is if that person hasn't been a meaningful part of the process to conceive or a meaningful part of that child's life, then it should be the opposite presumption. It's presumed that they are not. And so that's some of the work that we still have yet to do.
Yeah. Yeah, so tell me a little bit about how this case impacts families who are creating their own version of family through assisted reproductive technology. How does that kind of overlap?
Well, I would say for one, if you are intending to get a divorce, it's best to get that done beforehand. I thought that because there was no biological connection and all these other things that I was safe, if you will. I think marriage still carries a fair amount of weight. But there are women who, if they have a prolonged divorce and time's not on their side, then that really creates a problem. So I understand why that's true. Consult a lawyer, try to get legal documents before a child is born. I was very hesitant to engage attorneys because I thought two reasonable people could work things out. But if you don't have two reasonable people, then that's a problem. I also would say that if you had a a sperm donor, consider a known sperm donor or one that you can get some kind of verified information, because the fact that I didn't use a known sperm donor was an issue in this case because I couldn't establish who the parent was. But I will even say this for women who are in relationships with someone who you are kind of making that man the child's father. They're not biologically, but they call him daddy and they play a lot of the fatherly roles. If you decide to separate from that person, then our courts can say that that person has the right to visitation and things like that. So it's not always about biology. The courts like the fact that there are two parents in a child's life, and they really look at what is best for the child and not necessarily what the mother wants. That's kind of why I called it Cheri's choice, because I said it was my right to choose who was in my son's life. And now it's about women deserve the ability to become mothers with choice, clarity, and confidence.
I love that. So that kind of brings us to my next question. You wrote a book, Mission Motherhood. You've had so much experience, life experience through this process. How did you decide to write a book? Where did you kind of start? What was the writing process like? Tell me everything.
Gosh. Well, how could I not write the book? I mean, it was actually almost seems made up, all of the things that I went through. It just was, there were so many pieces of the journey that I went through that I felt like I couldn't hold all of that to myself and not try to help other women. So I consider the book kind of a love letter to fellow girlfriends. And it's meant to share my journey in a very raw and real way, almost as if you and I were sitting across the table, but this time with a good glass of wine or maybe a bottle of wine, and really sharing the truth about what this process is like. So that's why I wrote the book. I started Cheri's Choice because I wanted to give women the tools and the guidance to be able to do this for themselves, because the book just tells my story, but the fact is I want to help them write their own stories. And so that was really the inspiration behind my nonprofit.
Love that. So in the book, it's a memoir, correct?
It's a teaching memoir, which is
Okay.
a little bit of nuance, which means I spill all the tea, but at the end, I really say, here's some things I wish I had been able to tell my younger self. And it does have some recommendations.
I love that. And I think that also goes back to what we were chatting about before, where you're kind of like rewriting the narrative and rewriting that fairy tale, what it looks like to you. I think we think the process is the fairy tale, but really it might just be the end goal. So I think that's amazing to kind of share your story and also follow up with, this is how I would do it differently. This is what you could do differently. I think that's really amazing.
And what was crazy for me is I felt so powerful when it came to my career and so powerless when it came to being a mother. And I never want other women to feel powerless in that situation, because there's a lot that you can do. It doesn't mean you can magically create the family that you dreamed of as a little girl, but it does mean that you have the ability to create something beautiful.
Yeah, I love that. Well, I would love to do just a quick lightning round of questions for you. If you are ready, I am.
Okay, I'm prepared.
Okay. What is one thing that you wish women knew about solo motherhood?
That it can actually be a lot easier than a married partnership.
Yeah, my husband travels for work, and the first
And
thing
you
I
already
thought
know.
that's the first thing I thought of, like, he knows this, and it's so much harder when he's home because it's a whole other person to account for and bounce decisions off of, so I can identify with that side of things.
And the other thing about it is I was able to fully focus my time on my children when they were the most needy and not have to worry about this other relationship that I wasn't nurturing. I was able to fully focus, which was freeing in and of itself.
Yeah, I'm sure. Okay, what fairy tale belief had you had to let go of?
That there was only one path to motherhood. That's the big thing, that there are actually many, many paths to motherhood. And it's really a journey of self discovery.
Yeah. What is a moment of unexpected joy in your journey?
The unexpected joy, of course, when my daughter was born, that was a moment of just pure bliss for me. But I will tell you that another very meaningful one was when I carried my son and had him at 46, actually 2 weeks from my 10th birthday. And he was completely normal pregnancy, normal birth, 8 pounds, huge kid. We were 22 hours in the hospital, even with a C-section. And I truly got my normal after so much struggle. And that was an absolute gift.
Oh, that's so incredible. Last one is finish this sentence. Motherhood has taught me.
Motherhood has taught me that there's so much more meaning in life than just what we do for a living. That the ability to build into other people and help them become who they're meant to be is incredibly satisfying. And for me, is a big key to happiness.
Yeah, I love that. So tell people where they can find you, social media, website, and where they can buy your book.
Sure. Well, I assume you'll provide the links to various things, but you can find my book, Mission Motherhood, on Amazon. I also have an author website, which is just my name, CheriBergeron.com, and then Cheri'sChoice.com, which is my name with an S on it. And then choice.com is my nonprofit. And I'm available on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. Please just reach out, because my heart is that no woman would feel helpless in this process. And so if you feel that you were meant to be a mother, I just want to encourage you today. I want to say there is a path for you, and you may have to let go of some ideas of your utopic fairy tale. But guess what? There's a new fairy tale out there, and it's beautiful.
That's so amazing. Well, thank you so much for being on. This was an incredible conversation, super inspirational, and I look forward to reading your teachable memoir.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
That's it for today's episode of the Mama Making Podcast. If this conversation resonated with you, share it with a friend, leave a review, or follow us on social media. Thanks for being here, and we'll see you next time.